Assassin's Creed Shadows has finished its first full day of release, and the game is now out in the wilds. I've been playing it myself, and I will give you my honest opinion on what I've played so far. As someone who has played pretty much every game in the series, well minus the side-scroller ones, but first let's look into what this game has achieved in 24 hours, and look at it through a critical lens. This is from Fandom Pulse. Shadows has reached just around 41,000 players concurrently on Steam alone. Some people are touting this as a success. However, if we place this against Dragon Age Veilguard in its day one of release, that game managed to hit around 89,000 players within its first 24 hours on Steam. You don't need to be a math whiz to know the difference in these two. Honestly, I genuinely expected Shadows to hit at least 100,000 players on day one on Steam. I was completely convinced it would happen, but I was clearly way off. The actual numbers caught me off guard. Only 41,000 for a Screed? How did Veilguard manage to more than double that player count? Just as a reminder, Veilguard ended up selling around 1.5 million copies when all was said and done, yet it was still considered a commercial failure. It was eventually thrown onto PS Plus, where players outright rejected it, even when it was free, and honestly, I can't blame them. Looking at these numbers, there's no way Shadows is anywhere close to being a commercial success for Ubisoft, at least in my opinion. Of course, Ubisoft is trying to spin the narrative, as you can see in this Twitter post. It's not even 4 PM here in Canada, and Assassin's Creed Shadows has already passed 1 million players. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts for joining this adventure in feudal Japan. Notice how they phrase this announcement. 1 million players, not 1 million copies sold. If they had actually sold 1 million copies, they would have said so. The catch here is that Shadows is available through Ubisoft Plus, their subscription service, which is essentially Ubisoft's version of Game Pass. That means many people are playing Shadows without paying full price. Ubisoft, however, is counting those Ubisoft Plus players as part of their sales figures, even though the actual revenue per player is much lower. This isn't uncommon. Game companies often inflate their numbers by including Game Pass or PS Plus subscribers in their copies sold narrative. Why would they do that? Simple. Bigger numbers look better in a PowerPoint presentation when it's time for the next investor call. See, people are buying our games now. Give us your investments so that we don't go bankrupt. Everything about how executives phrase their words is meticulously crafted to create the most favorable impression, even if things are actually falling apart. It's like asking someone what they had for lunch, and they respond with, "I enjoyed a warm, freshly baked bun topped with crisp garden greens, a seared protein patty, and a rich, tangy sauce accompanied by golden, hand-cut potato slices and a refreshing, effervescent beverage." And then you realize they just had a burger, fries, and a soda. They're describing something ordinary in an elaborate way to make it sound far more refined, and that's exactly what's happening here. Sure, it crossed 1 million, but if you've been following my content on Shadows for a while, you'll know I've repeatedly stated in past videos that I expected Shadows to sell over 1 million copies, not players, within 24 hours. After all, this is Assassin's Creed. Yet even my modest expectations haven't been met, both in terms of Steam player counts and actual sales. It's honestly surprising that Shadows isn't reaching the heights of its predecessors. Of course, that hasn't stopped certain websites from doing exactly what I predicted they would when the time came. Here's PC Gamer claiming, Shadows has smashed Ubisoft's previous highest player count on Steam, which was Valhalla within 24 hours. This sounds amazing, right? Well, only if you believe everything you read online. The truth is, a quick Google search would tell you that Valhalla launched on Steam a full 2 years after its initial release on PS5 and Xbox. By the time it arrived on Steam, the game was packed with expansions, DLCs, and an overwhelming amount of cosmetics. Shadows, on the other hand, marks the first time in Assassin's Creed history that a game is launching on Steam the same day as PS5 and Xbox. Naturally, with all the hype, regardless of quality or controversy, there will be plenty of people eager to check it out. So of course, Shadows is going to surpass Valhalla's numbers. Most people who were eager to play Valhalla had already done so on PS5 and Xbox when it originally launched in 2020. In essence, you're comparing the Steam release of a 2-year-old game to a brand new installment dropping across all platforms simultaneously. They tried a similar narrative with Veilguard. Just look at what GameIndustry.biz had to say when it launched. It smashed EA's day one player count for Dragon Age as a franchise. Like no sheet. It did, because the previous game in the series, which was Inquisition, as you can see here via Steam database, didn't come to Steam until 6 whole years after it initially released on PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. Just like with Shadows and Valhalla, gaming journalists are carefully choosing their words to convince you that this is a success. In Veilguard's case, we know that wasn't true. The point here is that the narrative they're trying to push just isn't going to work on most people because gamers are more informed than ever. Of course, you'll still see the usual websites and shill Twitter accounts claiming that Shadows is a success, but the reality is that they manipulate statistics, like boasting about the biggest Steam release while conveniently ignoring historical context. They'll claim it sold 1 million copies when Ubisoft has only stated that there are 1 million players, not units sold. It's all about selective wording, and you should always question what you see online. If I hadn't just laid out the evidence you can verify yourself with a quick Google search, you might believe their claims. But the truth is, they are misrepresenting the success of their games because they want their mediocre products to seem like hits when they aren't. Still not convinced? Think about this. When a game performs well, does a company's stock price go up or down on day one? You'd expect it to rise, right? Well, in Ubisoft's case, once Shadows released within 24 hours, their stock went down 7%, which is already not good. But this is what I'm saying, you need to look at the cold hard facts here and not just think or believe with your emotions instead. I guess I shouldn't be surprised. I was playing this supposedly successful game with incredible characters, like Yaya, the towering sumo wrestler lady who realistically wouldn't even be a sumo wrestler during this time period. She stands out completely when you're playing as Shadow, a massive, over 6 foot tall, broad-shouldered Japanese woman living through a time of famine and war. Yet somehow, she appears to be consuming well over 3,000 calories a day. I didn't really explain that part well. From what I've played so far, this game is... well, let's get into it. Quick backstory. I've 100% completed Syndicate, Origins, Odyssey, Valhalla, and Mirage, earning the Platinum Trophy for each. I've also beaten all the other mainline games and even some spin-offs like Liberation. I've been with this series for a long time. I played Assassin's Creed 1 the day it was released and was completely obsessed, spending the whole weekend on it. I know how these games work inside and out, and I'm well versed in their lore. Now, after playing Shadows for about 8 hours on its first day, I can confidently say that so far it feels overwhelmingly mid in almost every way. Right from the start, you play as Yasuke. Eventually, you play as Nue, whose father, an actual ninja of his time, and one of the legendary Big Three, tasks her with retrieving a box from a tomb. This box can only be opened with the hidden blade. Nue arrives at the tomb, unlocks the door, and is immediately ambushed by a massive samurai in full armor. Somehow she doesn't hear him coming, because of course she doesn't. Then, for the first time in the game, something realistic actually happens. Nue gets knocked out cold in a single hit by the armored samurai. This is, without a doubt, the only believable moment in the entire game so far. With Nue down, the box is stolen. What's inside? No clue, though it's probably a piece of Eden. Anyway, she's then rescued by her father, since despite being a shinobi, she couldn't hear a fully grown man in clanking armor sneaking up on her in the dead of night. Feeling like she failed her father, which, let's be honest, she did, Nue becomes determined to make things right. So she dashes off into the night and tracks down the samurai guy who stole her box at a camp. This is where the game first lets you experiment and get acquainted with the mechanics. It doesn't take long to settle into the rhythm. I mean, it's Assassin's Creed after all. It's all pretty standard fare. Climbing around, stalking targets, although now you can go prone, which is a welcome addition finally making its way into these games. Still, I have to admit that the jump feels rather inconsistent and often doesn't behave the way you'd expect it to. This sort of thing happens from time to time, and yes, it's just as irritating. You'd think that with so many entries in the series, they'd have finally nailed the parkour mechanics. Yet, I still believe that Unity boasts the best parkour system in the series by a mile. So where was I? Right, Wai grabs the box and escapes the stronghold, only to be swiftly shot by an off-screen assailant. Out of nowhere, a group of masked individuals appears, clearly meant to represent the game's version of the Order of the Ancients from Origins. They just pop up suddenly. Why are these supposed important figures just loitering in the woods, waiting for Wai to show up and steal the box because the plot demands it? It's absurd. Then Wai's dad arrives to protect her, and there's this over-the-top slow-motion moment as he charges towards a massive group of armed foes. Guns, bows, you name it, only to be cut down in an instant. And no, This isn't a spoiler, it was all in the trailer. So Fujibayashi Nagato is dead, dispatched by this shady Japanese faction who seem to delight in cosplaying and ambushing in the woods. I even tried to look up how Nagato met his end in real life. He's an actual person, by the way, but aside from one of the 3 Master EA ninjas, I couldn't find much. It's ridiculous that he'd opt to rush these people instead of using a smoke bomb or something, especially considering he's supposed to be a master ninja. But I guess the story has to move along, so he's dead. And now Y is also left for dead, which is frustrating because it gives off some serious Last of Us Part 2 vibes. They should have just iced her, but the plot marches on. Then an old monk and a little boy show up to save the day. I raised an eyebrow when I saw them because there was this consultant on the game, a lady who openly admitted she specializes in the dynamics of old Japanese monks keeping young boys as companions for both assistance and, disturbingly, sexual reasons. So when I saw this duo that perfectly fits that profile, I thought, hold up, is this old monk about to exploit this kid, Sanro? Should I step in? Sadly, there wasn't any option to intervene, and it felt really off that they paired these 2 characters. Ubisoft has been very public about hiring that expert on these relationships, and yet it still leaves a sour taste. Anyways, Y ends up leaving the boy with the monk, which made me cringe. Like, save the kid already. I assumed we were meant to be protectors of the innocent. Thankfully, later the kid and the monk join your hideout, so at least someone else can keep an eye on that old guy. After that, you're pretty much dumped into the open world. And honestly, the open world is alright. I personally prefer the open worlds in Odyssey and Origins. They just feel more engaging. There are some visually impressive parts of Japan here, but when it gets dark, it's pitch black. I mean, look at the footage. When the game shifts to nighttime, I have to close my windows because it's too dark to see anything. Plus, many slopes and areas that seem climbable turn out not to be, which is super frustrating. It feels like Shadows is constantly pushing you onto predetermined paths instead of letting you explore freely. If you've played Valhalla, you know what I mean. There you can climb literally anything, but in Shadows, even Niyasuke can't climb the way you'd expect. The combat in Shadows is underwhelming, simple button mashing with little variety, and it pales in comparison to Ghost of Tsushima's richer, more nuanced system. Y's character remains bland beyond the opening mission, and Yasuke feels like a generic sword fighter rather than a compelling protagonist. Overall, nothing in this game feels groundbreaking. Ubisoft seems stuck in the past, delivering a mediocre experience that you might play in the background rather than an epic open-world adventure. Even internal warnings suggest that if Shadows sells only moderately, Ubisoft's future is in trouble. In the end, despite its ambition, Shadows feels like just another uninspired title. For a true open-world action game set in Japan, Ghost of Tsushima or Rise of the Ronin are far superior choices. Thanks for reading, subscribe for more insights and updates.